Even as a little boy, 6, 7 years of age, I remember getting together with other children, and we would pitch pennies and things like that. And as innocent as that sounds, it kind of set the mind that there's a way that you could advance in life without putting effort, just if you're lucky or if you're skilled or if you could win a game.
Michael Mooney's gambling addiction began with pitching pennies and ended when he nearly threw his life away. Beating the odds, overcoming gambling addiction. This week on My Healthy Mind. Welcome to My Healthy Mind. I'm Michael Hunter. To most people, the word addiction brings to mind drugs and alcohol. But a gambling addiction, though less known, can be just as epidemic and just as serious. Experts believe that gambling for fun can lead to addiction through the release of chemicals in the brain, making a gambling addiction one of the most difficult to beat.
Endorphins in the brain that normally make us feel good when we're doing normal, recreational, comfortable things, when we're taking a long walk, when we're eating a satisfying meal. Things that are very ordinary produce these pleasurable reactions. But with addiction, and gambling seems to be following the same trend as other addictions, there's a lot more of a bang for the buck, so to speak. There's a lot more of a severe reaction. Once people get that exhilaration, that excitement from gambling, they want to repeat that behavior, particularly if there's other pressures, stresses, or emotional tensions in their life where they want to relieve the problems by seeking the pleasure that they find at the gambling venue.
Today, my colleague Elizabeth Atkins speaks with Michael Mooney, recovering gambling addict turned psychotherapist, who's gone on to treat others like himself, whose lives went from fun and games to bust.
Michael, welcome to My Healthy Mind.
I'm glad to be here.
Tell us about yourself, your background, and how you became a gambling addict.
Well, I was born and raised in Detroit in the 1950s and 60s. And my father, he was an educated man, and at one time he taught school, but he loved mathematics, and he also loved drinking, and he certainly loved gambling. In the early 60s, my dad had lots of friends that worked in the automotive industry, and every year several would take a trip out to Las Vegas to the casinos. They would stop by and spend a few hours with my father, who would educate them on the odds and the percentages, different games. And as a child in that household, I was exposed to all different kind of poker games and 3-card Monte and behind-the-scenes magical tricks and things like that. But even as a little boy, 6, 7 years of age, I remember getting together with other children, and we would pitch pennies and things like that. And as innocent as that sounds, it kind of set the mind that there's a way that you could advance in life without putting effort, just if you're lucky or if you're skilled or if you could win a game, some kind of way that you wouldn't have to really work for a living. So I grew up with the fascination of gambling that was pretty much because of my father. Eventually, my father moved the family to Las Vegas. I didn't move out to Las Vegas. When my family moved out to Las Vegas, I was incarcerated. I was in Detroit, so my family moved pretty much without me. I kind of went through that curiosity, experimental stage when I was a youngster in early teens, smoked a little weed, had a few drinks. But by my mid-teens, I kind of like gravitated into the harder narcotics and specifically heroin. So I became a drug addict in my teen years, and of course I had some behavioral problems, some delinquency problems, and I was actually made a ward of the court of the state of Michigan in my teen years. Gambling with the other inmates was a way that I could make a steady income, a little flow of cash, because I was fairly good at it, being raised by my father.
So take us into the world of gambling and the mindset that you have there.
Well, gambling, for many people, it's a social type of event, gamble for fun, gamble for entertainment. But when it comes to the problem side of gambling, the hallmarks of my addiction, as others, is the mental obsession, the physical compulsion, and the loss of control.
So tell us about that. What is the mental obsession, the physical compulsion, and then the loss of control? How does that play out? Was your first thought, oh, I need to go play poker?
No, not at all. My first thought was the drug addiction. That came a little bit later. It became more obvious to me as time went on.
So what was your state of mind? Were you miserable? Were you trying to escape it? Were you just complacent about it?
Well, addiction in general, just in general, and I include the gambling, addiction is a pleasant distraction from emotional pain. My addictions were like all-inclusive, and it turned into a lifestyle, so.
You were content with that?
Correct.
So how long were you in prison, and how did you get out, and what happened after that?
Well, in the mid-1980s, I had a couple back-to-back drug charges, and I've already been to prison several times in substance abuse related. I wasn't staying clean. And then my parole agent gave me an option. She said, well, we can put you back in prison, or you can get into something called recovery, just like that. And I got clean in January 1991. And armed with the GED, I enrolled in college into the addiction studies part of the University of Detroit. Eventually, I met a gal in recovery, and we started dating. And she agreed to marry me, and we went back out to Las Vegas, where I wanted to get married with my family. But when I got clean from my addiction, it seems like that unmasked the gambling that was always there, which I really never prioritized. My wife won $4,400 on a $3 Keno game. And this is just fantastic. This is Vegas at its finest. And the next day, on April 30th, I decided that I would kill a few hours in the casino. I went up a couple $1,000s. It was so exhilarating, so exciting. It was just all coming together. It was like perfect. Well, then I went down a few $1,000s. And I glanced at my watch, and I've been sitting here now for 6 hours. I told people I'd meet them up for dinner. And so I got this panicky sensation. I just wanted to break even, get my money back, and go meet my family for dinner. And I'll tell you, it was as if I had veins bulging out of my head again, the obsession, the compulsion. This was addiction at its worst that I've ever had. It was on me. It was so obvious to me. In my first inclination, I was going to tear my shirt pocket, mess up my hair, and loudly announce, I was robbed. Yeah, somebody grabbed me, took all the money. But I had 4 years in recovery, and this is an honest program, and at some point, the lies have to stop. Later on that week, on the plane ride back to Detroit, I had to tell my wife that I would take the gambling just as serious as she knows that I take my recovery from chemical dependency. So my first day at one of these 12-step support groups for gambling was May 1st, 1995, a couple days after my wedding, one day after my big, tremendous losses. And to this date, I have not placed a bet.
Can you talk about how one addiction was masking another?
Yeah, I gambled all my life, and yet my priority was on the substance abuse. Some of that was that in my drug addictions, especially with the narcotics, there was withdrawal, physical discomfort, illness. The gambling, I never had any noticeable withdrawal. It wasn't like I was shaking or had upset stomach or restlessness. So I did not prioritize the gambling as the insidious addiction today I know it to be.
When we return, we'll learn more about how gambling can quickly go from light entertainment to a very dark addiction.
And the perception of it being a problem is not there because it's legal, socially acceptable, and widely available.
Stress, depression, and severe mental illness can happen to anyone. Team Mental Health Services has been helping those struggling with these conditions in southeastern Michigan. Within 24 hours of reaching out to our team, members receive psychiatric evaluations and begin the necessary treatment for recovery.
Towards the 6th court date, I finally stood up and said, I can handle this process the rest of the way. And it was all because of the motivation and encouragement I got from Team Mental Health staff.
Team Mental Health Services, because we care and you can.
Mag Formers. Each set sold separately, batteries not included.
Chasing the high is a common experience. It often is an escape to try to gain more pleasure or a relief from some of the stress of daily life. Increasingly for problem gamblers, of course, there's financial stresses and pressures. And to gamble gives them at least a temporary relief and the hope that maybe things will get or will improve despite their history of losses.
Welcome back to My Healthy Mind. We're exploring gambling addiction with recovering gambling addict and psychotherapist Michael Mooney. He takes us down his road to addiction and to recovery.
Michael, you've told us about your struggle with gambling addiction and how you got hooked at a young age. Tell us what constitutes a gambling addiction and how so many people get hooked.
Right. Initially, most players come to a game or a casino with a social background pursuing entertainment. Of course, it's not that hard to win money gambling. The hard part for problem gamblers is to actually leave with the money still in your pocket. So over time, the more you initially win when you have healthy boundaries, the more you return to play. The more you return to play, eventually the more you start losing. So there's a timeline. The more you win, the more you play, the more you play, the more you lose. But the lines that gamblers cross, mental lines, when you start gambling with money you cannot easily afford to lose, when you're staying longer than you planned on staying, and the big one in my thoughts is that when you find yourself lying to people that love you as to cover up where have you actually been, what you've been doing.
So what are some of the warning signs and dangers that can seduce the average person down that road to rock bottom?
Right. Many gamblers that eventually develop a problem report having a significant win early on. So you go to the casino to see what the excitement's all about, and maybe you walk away with $1,000 or $5,000. That early win seems to set a hook that over time will draw you back and back and back. So
that's beginner's luck, right?
But the beginner's luck, it really is that you have healthy boundaries. You don't stay longer than you planned on staying. You don't gamble with money you can't afford to lose. You're not lying to anyone. So it's not hard to win when you have boundaries and actually take the money out of the casino, treat yourself to something nice, pay off a bill. But the more you win, the more you want to come back and play.
And you call that chasing the high?
Chasing the high, yeah.
So what happens in our brains that triggers that?
Well, over time, many gamblers, our attentions are drawn to the excitement, the exhilaration of the casinos, because the truth is, in our modern society, nothing comes close to the high levels of stimulation and excitement, say Friday night at a VIP poker table. Everything else pairs in comparison. The movies, it doesn't have that pizzazz, that kick.
Talk about the allure of that and how it's advertised to draw people in.
Right, well, you know what, the modern gaming is one-stop shopping. You can go there for the games themselves, you can go down there for the buffet, for dining, musical acts. They've kind of cornered the market on adult entertainment. 20 years ago, the Detroit casinos was just pretty much getting started. What I'm very aware of is that we've had a proliferation of gambling. We've had an expansion of gambling. To my theory is that we are turning this entire country into one big suburb of Las Vegas, Nevada, right? So we went from having the lottery in the early 70s as the only legal form of gambling here in Michigan, and Las Vegas was out west. Well, then some years later we added Atlantic City. But today, gambling has exploded so much. You can play a 3-digit lottery, a 4-digit, the 5-digit, the mega balls, the power balls, and turn all around in a few hours and repeat later on this evening. We have several drawings a day. You can go to some of these supermarkets and get up to a $30 scratch-off ticket from a vending machine. Most restaurants have Keno. As you're dining, you can play Keno. You go into any neighborhood bar or tavern, there's video poker, there's Keno. You can gamble at the bowling alley. There's charity poker rooms. We have over 25 casinos now in the state of Michigan. Of course, then you look at the fantasy sports phenomenon. You could bet at the racetrack in real time with horses running at a track in Florida. You can gamble with Las Vegas bookies. And the big one, though, is that we have just over 2,600 gaming sites on the internet. So we're being exposed to so much gambling, and the perception of it being a problem is not there because it's legal, socially acceptable, and widely available. The public doesn't perceive gambling as the problem that I know it to be.
We'll have more when we come back about addiction to gambling and what can be done to beat the odds.
The Michigan Lottery is one of the largest lotteries in the country. Knowing your limits is the best bet is our motto. And we include that with our advertising, we include that with our online advertisements and on our website, because that's a way to encapsulate what we want people to keep in mind is know your limits, play within your limits. If you start to play outside of your limits, then you might have a problem, and then it might be time to consult somebody, call the helpline, and get some help, get that outside assessment.
Welcome to My Healthy Mind.
A show that dares to talk about mental health matters that touch nearly every family. Each week you'll meet guests who share their stories, hear from local experts, and learn about resources that may help.
And so I was in a committee meeting at the House of Representatives when I realized that my daughter had autism.
We need to take the stigma away from mental health issues.
No topics about mental health and wellness are off limits on our show.
Let's talk about it on My Healthy Mind.
The state of Michigan offers a 24-hour helpline for problem gamblers. If I could share it, it's 800-270-7117. So it's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for people who are struggling and at risk for other problems related to gambling. So there are professional gambling therapists available through the hotline and other private sources. There's the Gamblers Anonymous 12-step fellowship for gamblers, and a companion group that's available in some communities called Gam-Anon for the families of problem gamblers. And they can attend those support groups regardless of the gambler's attendance at GA.
Welcome back to My Healthy Mind. We're delving into gambling addiction, its causes, its symptoms, and what can be done to beat it. Elizabeth Atkins speaks with recovering gambling addict turned psychotherapist, Michael Mooney.
Michael, can you talk about how risk tolerance leads to desperation?
Right. There are different phases that gamblers go through. It's like a progression. Most of the time in early gambling, there's what we call the winning phase. And this is because you got healthy boundaries, you win some money, you could leave the casino, pay off a bill, enjoy something, treat yourself to a gift. Over time, that's followed by a losing phase. And of course, you're gambling more than you used to gamble, and you're losing money that you can't really afford to lose. You're chasing your losses. And as time progresses, for some, it enters a desperation phase. And the phase of desperation is when there's a lot of secrecy, you're gambling with money that you know cannot be replaced, you're mentally obsessed when you're not gambling. And for some gamblers, after going through that desperation phase, there's a phase called hopelessness. And the hopelessness phase for some gamblers is where you've done things gambling that there's no coming back from. And it is this hopeless sensation that often leads to contemplate suicide. Gamblers contemplate and attempt suicide much more than alcoholics or drug addicts. I know that when you look at the modern commercialization, the television ads for gambling, it looks like a lot of fun, but in reality, there's a lot of hardship, a lot of heartbreak, a lot of desperation, foreclosure, bankruptcy, suicides, divorce rate. So there's much more going on behind the scenes with the problem side of gambling than simply, oh, I'm losing too much money.
Michael, we've seen how innocent gambling, which never becomes a problem for most people, can cause addiction and complete ruin for others. Tell us how you realized that you were addicted and how you overcame it.
All right, when I was sitting at a poker table the day after my wedding in Las Vegas, chasing my losses, the mental obsession, it's like the gorilla was loose from the cage running rampant in my head. And at that moment, my crisis, it just came so crashing down on me that I need help.
So how did you finally notice that?
Well, when I had to tell my wife that we don't have the money, that she thinks that we're gonna pay off her car and have some money, maybe even put down on a house, and that wasn't the case. I had gambled.
And how did she react?
Well, 2 days into a wedding, I'm sure she probably wasn't thinking about getting a divorce, but she's been highly supportive of me.
How important is having a supportive spouse to recovery?
Very important, and the lies have to stop. So I've been open and honest. We've been together now. We've been married for 21 years since 1995, and so we enjoy a recovery lifestyle, a recovery household.
Well, there are people that do recover, and this is another benefit of the 12-step groups, is that you see people who have been abstinent from gambling for years or even decades at times. People early in their experience trying to recover from gambling problems need that element of hope and inspiration they can find in meetings from people who are successfully recovering.
Stress, depression, and severe mental illness can happen to anyone. Team Mental Health Services has been helping those struggling with these conditions in southeastern Michigan. Within 24 hours of reaching out to our team, members receive psychiatric evaluations and begin the necessary treatment for recovery.
Towards the 6th court date, I finally stood up and said, I can handle this process the rest of the way. And it was all because of the motivation and encouragement I got from Team Mental Health staff.
Team Mental Health Services, because we care and you can.
Well, the first step of any plan or direction of help and relief from these problems is acceptance. A lot of times people with gambling problems believe that the problem is that they're losing money and that if they start winning again, the problems will subside. So what we understand with helping a gambler is to allow them to understand that they have an illness, that they have a problem that's not going to go away with a winning experience because they're just going to continue to gamble and eventually lose that money that they won earlier.
Michael, how do you stay clean in a world where gambling is everywhere?
Yeah, because it's everywhere, it's very, very difficult. We've never had more ways to gamble than today in history. It's become a nationwide hustle. It's just so expansive. What I do is I've been involved in recovery support groups since I got gambling clean 21 years ago. I don't want to say there's magic there, but gamblers that get involved in support group meetings, in addition to therapy, do much better than those that do not.
Do you ever feel tempted?
I have had the desire to gamble lifted from me. I've lost the desire. Not to say it can't return, but I haven't had an urge to gamble now in some years.
So tell us about your life now. You have a tremendous success story.
Right. Well, you know what? I live a healthy life. I've traveled the world. My wife and I enjoy all the benefits of our recovery lifestyle. Tomorrow we're leaving for Europe for a couple weeks, and there's a recovery component to that. I'm happy to report that I live a debt-free life. I have paid off all my student loans and my house. Everything that I own is owned outright, and that's a gift of my recovery. So I just feel like I owe my life to this recovery process, and I'm here to enjoy it.
So do you wake up in the morning feeling happy, relieved, peaceful?
Absolutely. I have a fairly content lifestyle. I have some serenity, I have some self-acceptance, I have opportunities, I have potential. And these are gifts that came to me in midlife getting into this recovery process. So prior to that, I was a train wreck. And as much as, you know, I like to look back at my recovery, I'm happy to report that the state of Michigan, we got some programs now that are available to all state citizens with gambling issues. There's a 24-hour helpline telephone number. We have different programs that advocate the recovery process, and we have the 12-step groups that are specific to gambling. So if you have viewers that have gambling issues, I would just certainly encourage them to take a look at these resources in our community.
And is it possible to get the treatment people need for free?
Absolutely. We have a gambling program here in Michigan. Some states do not have funded treatment. The Michigan Lottery and the 3 Detroit casinos primarily fund the statewide problem gambling treatment program. And so it's based on income and insurances, but nobody is turned away. Nobody, so.
We like to emphasize that there are lots of resources for problem gamblers. There's hope for positive change. They have to appreciate that it's a temporary problem that can be rectified. So by calling the 800 hotline for gambling support and treatment, by attending support groups or seeking professional help to understand that they have an illness and not a bad habit or not a bad stretch of luck, that's a critical starting point.
Elizabeth, Michael told us a very compelling story. Who knew that something as simple as pitching pennies could turn into a full-blown gambling addiction?
Michael Mooney shows that with self-awareness and professional help, recovery is possible. We want to help you on your quest for mental wellness, so we put information on our website, myhealthymind.com. Please take a look. Visiting myhealthymind.com could be an excellent first step in the process to beating the odds and overcoming gambling addiction.
And we'd like to hear from you about topics you'd like us to discuss on My Healthy Mind. We mean the tough topics, because talking about them openly will give you an opportunity to remove the barriers that are in the way of your well-being. So reach out to us on our website at myhealthymind.com or Twitter at myhealthymind or on Facebook.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week for another edition of My Healthy Mind. Let's talk about it.